6th? There's no direct evidence that he took part in the insurrection inside the U.S. Capitol, but he did praise the rioters, tweeting that this is what happens when the people feel they have been ignored and Congress refuses to acknowledge rampant fraud. How do you respond to his attacks on the election system? And you have 1 minute.
I mean, in clear, plain English, Mark Fincham, in the role that he's been acting, he is serving as a puppet for insurrectionists, quite frankly. That's it. He is actively campaigning to tear down our democratic system. That's a problem, and that's an issue. And in fact, he is the leading Republican right now to get that nomination. That should be something that has everyone in here fired up and ready to make sure that we're bringing more people to the polls. And the reality is that Mark Fincham, I've served with him in the state legislature. In fact, he sits a few seats behind me. And what I can tell you is that his vision for our Arizona is much different than the vision that we have for Arizona. It's one in which folks like him are elected, and if they don't, they're going to try to throw out our election results.
Thank you.
That he was involved. He gave aid and comfort to the enemy of the United States of America that tried to overturn our Constitution. He was directly involved. He was part of the planning, according to Ali Alexander. He's been promoting and praising everything since then, and so I would gently disagree. He is an insurrectionist, he is a seditionist, and he's a traitor against the United States of America. Moreover, there's a lawsuit currently pending, and I hope it's successful, that bars him from running for office. It was meant for Confederate traitors. It should apply now to January 6th traitors like Mark Fincham and Andy Biggs and Paul Gosar and the lot. Yes. Look, we've got to know these things and fight against these people and call them out for the traitors that they are at every moment. They should not be allowed to give aid and comfort, because words do have meaning. And the fact that they will celebrate these folks that marched against our Constitution, erected a gallows to hang Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi on the mall. I was just in Washington, D.C. with my 3 teenage daughters. We were taking pictures along the reflecting pool outside of the Lincoln Memorial. We went up and they touched that Washington Monument. And I couldn't help but think what it would have been like. And I imagined where that gallows was. And I didn't talk to them specifically about it. But we need to be talking directly about these traitors and these seditionists. We need to not be giving them countenance, aid, and comfort like they gave those rioters on January the 6th.
Thank you. A third candidate over on the other side of the aisle, Senator Michelle Genti-Rita, has repeatedly pushed to ban the use of ballot drop boxes. She wants to basically bar people from being able to drop off their early ballots at all at any place and require them to be returned by mail. How would such a move affect voters, especially those who live in rural areas, including native voters on reservations? Adrian Fontes, 1 minute.
Yeah, I was in Heber Overguard recently at the sheriff's depot, not the main sheriff's office, but they've got a drop box out there for ballots outside the building. It's about by the street. Look, rural Arizona doesn't look like a lot of these communities that we live in, whether it's downtown Phoenix or Laveen or down here in Quail Creek. Rural Arizona is rural. And sometimes folks need that convenience. They need that way to do it. And oh, by the way, it's not just the drop box, and I think Michelle misunderstands this thing. Each one of those goes through the exact same security checks and processes that every other ballot goes through. It's got a barcode on the outside. They check the signature before they open it up. It's cataloged to make sure that that voter hasn't already voted in person. And we can do that live check through the system that we created in Maricopa County. Hopefully the rest of the counties will have that soon. There are so many security checks in our election systems. The misunderstanding that these folks have that are just trying to suppress the vote is clear evidence that folks who may be passing laws and may be working in those areas don't get the technical specifics to be able to help counties like Navajo County, like Greenlee County, like Yuma County. They have different systems, and they've got to help their population do their thing. We've got to be listening to them, not to some legislator out of Scottsdale who's never actually run an election. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I mean, I'd like to give her a compliment somehow, but I think that's something that Mr. Boulding and I will agree on.
Same question, Reginald.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, the reality is there's been 900 voter restriction bills that have been introduced in this country this past year. Over 900. With 100 of them being authored right here in the state of Arizona. Just let that sink in. And in large part, we've been able to fight and stand up against a lot of these. And I'm proud of the leadership of my caucus. I serve on the House Government and Elections Committee where those bills come. And we've been calling those bills out, and we've been pointing, and we've been making sure that people actually know what's going to harm the state of Arizona. That's extremely important. Out of those 100 that have been introduced, only a handful have actually made itself to the governor's office and have been signed into law. Just recently, Ms. Ugenti Rita tried to introduce an amendment that would completely ban ballot drop boxes, and we were able to defeat that. And you know, the reality is that this is not just a 2022 issue, or 21 or 22. They've been attempting to take away our ability to vote for a decade now, piece by piece. We saw the same thing with the vouchers, right? You go piece by piece, drip by drip to get to a position where then you get to a place where people no longer have the access and the availability to vote. So what we have to do is we have to do whatever we can to protect our vote by mail system. And currently right now, as I mentioned, I'm in federal court to make sure that we bring back our permanent early voting list. Because again, one thing that we absolutely agree on is when you sign up for a list that's called the permanent early voting list, it should be permanent.
100%.
It should be permanent. And the reality...
So I'll applaud that one.
and the reality is that, under, whether it's Ugenti Rita, Mark Fincham, Shauna Bullock, or whoever, they will do whatever they need to do the bidding for folks like Donald Trump to push the legislature however they need to take away our right to vote.
Going a little bit beyond the issue of drop boxes, but continuing about rural and native voters especially, how would you better work to serve them both in elections and the other responsibilities of the Office of Secretary of State? Reginald Boulding, 90 seconds.
Yeah. So one of the big things that we have to do is we have to make sure that we are listening to our tribal communities. And we have to make sure that our tribal communities, our rural voters, they actually have not only a seat at the table, but they can actually put forth recommendations that can then be enacted. As the top Democrat, what I have is several different constituency groups that I meet with bi-weekly on issues that matter most to them. So whether you're a laborers union or you're an education community, whether you're community stakeholders, meet with these organizations to say what are some of the things that you're seeing on the ground and what are the solutions that we can actually put forth at the state legislature. And I think we have to do the exact same thing. We have to make sure that we are focusing on our native and rural communities, and that's first by making sure that we are hiring people in our office that not only represents those communities, but that can actually go back and interface with those communities. I'm proud of the relationship that I have with the governor of the Gila River Indian community or President Jonathan Nez of the Navajo Nation, because those are the relationships that you need to actually see what are the issues that are taking place in our communities. So what we do know, and what they've consistently said, that is if you have to drive an hour and a half to a drop box and then drive another hour and a half back, we're talking about a 2-hour round trip just to have your ability to vote. That's ridiculous. 3, that's ridiculous. And the expectation that someone's gonna be a consistent voter, that's just not the reality. So what we have to do is we have to work on a strategy to make that happen, and that's one of the most fundamental things that we can do, because as Arizona continues to be a place where our rights are being attacked, you have to make sure that you're looking proactively at ways that we can improve.
Go ahead.
I'll just jump in. Yeah, as county recorder, we won a national competitive award for community round tables, and we outreach to 6 traditionally underrepresented communities, including our indigenous brothers and sisters, African American voters, Asian American Pacific Islanders, Latino and Hispanic voters, also college and university students who have unique challenges to voting, and the community of voters with disabilities. Our program won a competitive award. We were one of 6 national awardees out of 1,000 who applied. But as to some specifics to help, yes, we have to listen, but we also have to communicate in native languages. I think the Secretary of State could work with a lot of local administrators and make sure that we are advertising on Navajo radio in Dene, not in English. To make sure that if we have to do it through law or working with the legislature, make sure that native IDs are actually usable as voter ID, right? Because if they're issued by the tribe, they should be good. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, they were the first people here. We might as well, they were the last folks to get full citizenship rights in the 70s. And I think that there's a technical aspect in here that's really important too, because one of the problems with a lot of these reservations vis-a-vis election administration, not that there's plenty of other issues, but we have to make sure that our voter registration systems are adaptable to use longitude and latitude specific identifiers so that we can get folks the right ballot for the right precinct that is within the jurisdiction that they should be voting in, whether it's a school district, a congressional district, or whatever. These are some of the specifics that we tried to build into the new voter registration system when we were working originally with the Reagan administration and then with the Hobbs administration and the subcontractors that were creating the statewide voter registration database. Because our voter registration is a 13-1-in-1 system. I could get all wonky, but I'm not going to. These are the things that you need to know going in. These are some of the very specific things pertaining to this very important community who came out real big for Joe Biden, by the way. These are the things that you have to have the experience on the ground working with on reservations with those communities to actually help them vote better, which I've done. And we've worked with county recorders across all of Arizona when we were working on these systems. So there are some very specific things that we can look at to help our indigenous brothers and sisters realize their fundamental rights.
Just yesterday, Governor Doug Ducey vetoed a measure, HB 2617, which would have required the Secretary of State and county recorders to closely monitor and frequently purge the voting rolls. Ducey's veto letter said the basis to remove a voter under that law were vague and lacks any guidance, and that the measure would leave voter registration susceptible to being canceled based on fiction rather than fact. I would imagine that both of you probably agree with that part of it. But his veto letter also said he would favor more stringent monitoring of the voter rolls. How do you assess those proposals, Adrian Fuentes?
Well, I assess them the same way I did when I was the county recorder. Back when Michelle Reagan was the secretary, the election director, Eric Spencer, specifically wrote letters to some of the county recorders in Arizona telling them to take certain people off the voter rolls. One of them happened to be the high school volleyball coach of the daughter of one of the county recorders. She wasn't dead or out of the country, she just was on the list. We got to make sure, and I think one of the reasons that Ducey vetoed the bill, that you may agree with this, is because they knew they wouldn't be able to pass judicial muster. It was unconstitutional on its face. But he's going to pander to his crowd. And he's going to continue to say, continuing this mythology that we've got to be able to do this, we've got to do this more stringently, we have to. Folks have no idea how many times we do NCOA checks, that's the National Change of Address Database, how many times we check the Social Security death databases, how many times we check with vital records. When you're the registrar of voters, and in Maricopa County, we had more voters, heck, we had 2/3 of the state's voters up there. We did it day in and day out on regular schedules to make sure that only the folks that we needed to be spending money on sending ballots to were actually still there. And we had 2 and 3 notices that went out, we followed the law, and we'd extend it wherever we could. But at the end of the day, we already have a very robust system to do this. So the continuation of these mythologies by folks like Doug Ducey saying, well, this one wasn't good, but we still need to do all this stuff, shows a clear ignorance of what it is that we already actually do, of how secure our systems already are. If you look at the volume of votes across the United States of America and you look at the actual prosecutable cases, of voter fraud, they're de minimis. They're almost none. Why? Because county recorders and election administrators across America and here in Arizona do a really damn good job. And I'm sick and tired of people discounting that really, really good work that has been done at the counties for all of Arizona's voters. These teams work tirelessly. Heck, I was talking to somebody in the back earlier. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. She was excited about going back and working at the polls. You all run the elections. You all are the ones that support whoever the elected is or the Board of Supervisors. We do really good work here in Arizona. And it's a damn shame that a guy like Doug Ducey is going to say that we need more stringent stuff when we've already got one of the best systems in the country.
What's your take, Reginald?
No, I mean, look, the reality is Governor Ducey, he stopped being Governor Ducey a long time ago. He's turned into Donald Trump's puppet. I mean, that's just the reality is. And the reality from that is that we have to make sure that at all costs that we are protecting our rights, our freedom to vote. Look, House Bill 2617 is an example of the work that can happen when you are bringing coalition leaders together. And there was a long strategic effort that we painted to show the governor's office, to show other stakeholders that, again, if you pass this bill, we're not only going to take you to court, but it's going to look extremely bad. And we were able to successfully defeat that. But there's still more work to do down at the state legislature. There's still more work to do down and when we're seeing, especially down with some of our Republican opponents who are actively campaigning, literally actively campaigning on adding more restrictions to the rolls. The reality is that one of the things that's going to be extremely important is that we have to make sure that we elect a Democrat as governor. That has to be first and foremost. Because what we know is that if you have bills that are coming through the state legislature, a Democratic governor to actually veto these bills is going to be extremely important. And while Governor Ducey, he vetoes one in every 100 election bills, the reality is we know that he also signed the bill that would purge the voting rolls. We also know that he signed a bill that would make it more difficult for our Native communities to have access to the ballot. We also know that he's actively campaigning against women that have the ability to choose what's happening to their own bodies. So with the governor, he's someone that I'm very hesitant to give him a round of applause for doing one good action. We need him to step up and do a lot more.
It was touched on a little bit earlier. One of the tasks of the Secretary of State is some very dry reading. Those are the regulations and guidelines, kind of fill in the blanks of election laws and lay out exactly how we are supposed to operate our polls, count the ballots. That's supposed to be done for every election year. It didn't happen this time. Because of some pretty serious disagreements between Secretary of State Katie Hobbs and Attorney General Mark Brnovich. What sort of effect is not having an updated election manual going to have on this election? And are there any proposed changes that really need to be included? Reginald, can you run that down in 2 minutes?
Yeah, the most hypocritical thing about Mark Brnovich not actually doing his job is that now we're going to be operating under the exact same election rules that we had in 2020. The exact same rules. So this idea that somehow the election was corrupt, it was stolen, we're going to be in the exact same system. And maybe that's them trying to create a bridge to somehow say that, well, the 2022 election wasn't free and fair. That could be one of their approaches. But the reality is that when you have folks who are running for Attorney General, who's actually using the basis of that office to campaign for a Senate race and not actually doing the functions of that job, that's a problem for Arizona. And quite frankly, he should have resigned. He should resign. Because the reality is that our elections procedure manual, you have to give direction. You have to give vision for our county recorders and for the public at large to know what are the rules of the game. And again, Secretary Hobbs, she laid out, again, what she would have proposed with regards to changes. And again, what we saw was that again, we had Attorney General who chose to put politics over the actual practical policy of getting things done. And that is just something that we cannot have happen in the state of Arizona.
So I think one of the negative impacts is that you're going to have 15 different counties interpreting what the latest updates and statutes are from the legislature. So that's number one, opening up lots of litigation for the specific counties. Now, the backstop against that is it's literally the Arizona Elections Officials Association, which meets, this is the county recorders and the election directors get together. The supervisors sometimes they'll send the election directors or another representative. And this is an organization of folks across the state who kind of put stuff together when the state fails, because this won't be the first time in Arizona history that we don't have an updated election procedures manual. We've had a lot of folks coming out of the legislature to be Secretary of State, Ken Bennett and Michelle Reagan and what was her name? She became Governor, Jan Brewer. And we had inconsistency. Thank you, that wasn't a joke, but I appreciate the snickers.
You should have taken just one more beat with that one.
Yeah, anyway, scorpions. So the bottom line is this. When Eric Spencer, who was the election director under Michelle Reagan, took that election procedure manual that we had before and he tried to revamp it, he completely eviscerated the simplicity and some of the beauty in there. It was basic guidelines and the counties did their thing within those guidelines. And what he did was, I think, very selfish, because he's an election attorney at Snell and Wilmer, a big law firm in Phoenix. He created this very elaborate set of rules and regulations and made it very specific and very statute driven and so on and so forth, so that he could sue later. So that he could know where all kind of the fun stuff is hidden and his clients could sue later. And that was the same approach that the prior newest election director chose to do under the Hobbs administration, much to the chagrin of many county officials. And we said, go back to the old simple one. And that's the problem that we have, is we've got too many lawyers doing this stuff. Now, I happen to be a lawyer, and I happen to know the evils of writing like a lawyer and doing things like a lawyer, and that's why when I'm in charge, I usually let the career professionals take care of telling me what they need, and then I try to go get it. Because they're the ones with the wisdom and the experience and the time and grade. They're the ones that know what their job needs to be done, including the election stuff. And that's the kind of thing that we have to have, not this, sort of ethereal, legalistic, weird thing that we've got right now. It's not, I won't say it's dangerous, because there's a backstop, and it's a bipartisan backstop, and they work really well together. The Republican and Democratic, recorders and election directors and stuff. But hopefully it won't have too much of an impact.
Let's talk about one of the elephants in the room. Representative Bollock and other Republicans have said that the state legislature should have the authority to overrule the result of an election if they don't like it, and substitute their own determination for a slate of presidential electors. I'm going to assume that you're probably not down with that idea, but Reginald Bollock, how would you fight that if you were in office and it were to be attempted?
Look, I mean, this story gets even deeper when you talk about Representative Bollock. Her husband actually serves on the Supreme Court, the Arizona Supreme Court. There was just a recent report that showed an email between Jeannie Thomas, Clarence Thomas' wife, sent an email to Shauna Bollock about overturning the 2020 elections, that she then sponsored legislation that would do just that, allow the legislature to actually be the body to decide whether or not they could certify or not certify elections. So again, at the highest levels of government, what we're seeing is corruption. From the U.S. Supreme Court to the Arizona State Legislature, there is a direct line, and that was just recently reported on nationally. The reality is elected leaders should not be in the business of writing legislation that will take away the rights and the votes of people. People have the ability to cast their ballot for whoever they want. Whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, you're going to make sure that you have the ability to cast your vote. Some elections you'll win, some elections you won't. But once you start having a legislature trying to tear down the system just because they want to win, that's when we're at a point now where democracy is severely under attack. And take no further than looking at what's happening in the United States Congress. That system is so broken right now that, constantly people are turning on their TV and they're seeing, story after story where congressional men and women and senators, they're not stepping up to do their job. And where they're not challenging when they need to be challenging. And that is seeping down into our system. And that is a threat. I have 3 little girls, a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 12-week-old. And I can tell you this, I want them to live in a system that will allow them to have the ability to have their voices heard, for them to be able to cast a vote to fight for issues that matter most to them. For me personally, again, I was born in poverty. I used the Pell Grant in order to go to college. Went to college, had an opportunity to grow my education and provide an opportunity to do more for others. The system, government, has helped provide that opportunity. There were lawmakers who wrote the Pell Grant. There were lawmakers who rolled up their sleeves to make that happen. There is no other country in this world where you can have someone to be born in poverty to now serve as the House Democratic leader. And I can tell you, our system helped make that happen. And it's personal when folks like Representative Bullock or whoever tries to break down that system. And that's why we have to fight, and that's why we have to make sure that during the 2022 election, we all turn out to vote.
I think it's important when you're countering these kinds of really extreme views from someone like Representative Bullock, that you have a clear historical perspective. The organic document that created the government of the United States of America was not the Constitution, it was the Articles of Confederation. We found that not to be effective, and so we changed it into the Constitution. And Article, I think it's 6 or 7, I forget, is of amendments. We decided we were going to change it. We added 10 in the Bill of Rights, and then we added more. Okay? The bottom line here is that we've moved and we've shaped and we've kind of moved away from a system that used to actually exist where the legislators would actually pick the electors. It's right there, it's in the Constitution. The states decide how that happens. We've moved to a popular vote across the country, but we don't actually vote for the person, we vote for electors. And we've got these agreements that those electors are going to cast those ballots. Okay? So when you talk about these things to folks like Shauna Bullock, you've got to hit them where it hurts. Because they're originalists. They're the folks who are going to say tradition is the only thing that matters. The single most important American tradition as it comes to elections is the fact that we continue to open up the franchise, we continue to include more people, and we continue to expand our power as individuals over our government. This is a step backwards. It is anti-American. And if you don't talk about it that way, you're not going to get the folks who agree with her to understand that she's just flat wrong. And her view is anti-American. We can speak in hyperbole and big ideas all that we want. But there is an understanding about American history and about American exceptionalism that's the real exceptionalism, and that is that we continue to include more people. And but for Alito's draft on Roe v. Wade, we've never taken away a fundamental right. We've always added them. So these guys are taking us away from the American tradition of expansion of rights, expansion of the electorate, and moving towards a popular vote, which, by the way, there is a constitutional amendment that has floated through several, I think a couple dozen states already. We're only 1 or 2 away from actually making it so that there's an interstate compact that all of those states must move electors who win the popular vote towards the presidency. And they'll do it and it turns American elections away from the Electoral College into a popular vote. That is on the table. That is a piece of legislation that Arizona could adopt. If we were in the majority, we probably would. I hope we would. But these are the kinds of things that I think we have to talk about, but we have to have the understanding from an historical perspective. We have to have that experience to be on top of the rhetoric. Because Shauna Bullock sitting right here would not be able to counter the idea that the single most important American tradition vis-a-vis elections is the expansion of those elections and a movement towards the people away from these legislative bodies that were originally created to ensure that power stayed among the powerful.
Things that you don't agree with them on. How would you oppose the efforts by a Governor Lake or Robson or Salmon to alter Arizona's elections?
Well, I would deal with them quietly. Because they have very, very thin skin. And they don't like being embarrassed or challenged in public. And I think you have to get, in order to get things done, sometimes you don't do it out in public. You don't do it out in the public square, right? You don't sometimes go out, and it has its usefulness, right? You can make change out there with the protests, but as county recorder, I got the 4-to-1 Republican Board of Supervisors to completely revamp our election system. They spent millions of dollars. We went from 75 employees to 151 employees in the election department. Under a Republican board, they had to approve those budgets. How did we do it? Quietly. Because we wanted to get the job done, we didn't want to take credit for it. You listen to the Republicans talk about the election system, and boy, they're going to sit there and say, oh, we took all these duties away from Fontes. Well, let them have that. I don't need credit for having sat down at the negotiating table and maintaining control through 2020. You don't have to get credit all the time. If you do it quietly and effectively and you get the job done, that's what matters. And that's what we did. So working with folks that you disagree with, it's not hard. You find the points of agreement and you move forward from there. It's really not hard. You know, we agree on a lot of things. Heck, Reggie and I agree on a ton of stuff, right? We're going to get up here and fight because this is political and this is politics, and that's what you do, right? We're Americans. We like to fight. But at the end of the day, I'll bet dollars to donuts that this gentleman and myself could get a heck of a lot accomplished. Could get a heck of a lot accomplished, even if we were diametrically opposed, if we did it quietly behind the scenes and made sure that the job got done. Because guess what? We didn't do what we did in Maricopa County on the front page of the Arizona Republic. We did it in the boardrooms. We did it in public record, right? But we made sure that the job got done because it was less important who got credit. And it was more important that we expanded the voting access that we did to get the magnificent results that we did.
Same question, Reginald. How would you deal with a Republican governor?
I mean, you could also ask, how could I deal with a Republican doozy right now, right? Literally as a top-ranking Democrat, that's what I'm doing, right? And there's a number of different, things that, I'm called to do with regards to negotiations, and I think it's important. Right now, we're in the process of negotiating a $1 billion water policy right now, sitting at the table, going through those conversations. In years past, I've negotiated wildfire relief, the opioid epidemic, tribal gaming. Those are the things that I currently do in my role right now as the top Democrat in the House, working with the Republican governor in a Republican-held House and Senate. And that's going to be extremely important because whoever is, again, the next Secretary of State, they also serve as the Lieutenant Governor. So understanding and having that experience is fundamental. But I do want to say that there is something that's extremely important. As the second highest ranking Democrat in the state with the Secretary of State's office, if there is a Republican governor who is trying to take our ability to fund public schools away, trying to take the ability for women to have the right to choose, who are trying to make it more difficult for those 100,000 plus kids who are currently on kids care who need access to health care, if they're trying to take those things away, I would be negligent in my job by not speaking out and making sure that we're advocating and we're organizing people around those issues. The reality is this, people don't know what's happening at the state legislature. People don't know what's happening in the governor's office. And the reason why is because there has not been enough attention around those issues, because I am convinced that if Arizonans knew that we don't fund full-day kindergarten in the state, we don't fund it. What schools do is they take their money from first grade, second grade, third grade, and they subsidize that for kindergarten. If Arizonans knew that we don't fund all of our kids on kids care, then make sure that every kid in the state of Arizona should have health insurance, I think more people would be fired up. I think if people knew that if Roe v. Wade was taken away, that means that abortions could absolutely be banned in the state of Arizona. I don't think people know that. And the way that you make sure that you are activating Democratic voters, that you're activating Arizonans, is to make sure that your voice is heard and they can see and they can hear what's happening. Because we can no longer remain silent. We can no longer remain silent. Now is the time for us to take back our country. Because there are people who are literally trying to take that away from us. There is nothing more American than having the freedom to vote. Nothing more American than having the freedom to vote. And people are literally standing on Fox News saying that they want to take away people's freedom to vote. They're saying there's a certain quality of votes. What does that even mean? They're arguing in front of the Supreme Court that their intent is not to make sure that they bring more people to the polls. So we have to make sure, especially if we have a Republican governor, that we have a Secretary of State who would be the second highest ranking, who would be the highest ranking Democrat if myself or Mr. Fontes wins. They have to speak back, they have to show leadership, and they have to push forward.
Thank you. So we're going to try something a little bit different here for the wild card question. It's going to be the opportunity for each of you to ask your opponent a question. I'm going to be a little strict with the time here and make sure that, to be fair, that you don't go over. You'll have 30 seconds to pose a question, and then the answer can be up to 2 minutes. So, Adrian Fontes, is there anything you want to ask Reginald Boulding today?
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that we're here is to get to know folks a little bit better. And I have to say that falls in line with some of the other questions that people want to ask sometimes. And that's like, say something nice about your opponent. And so the question that I'm going to have for Mr. Boulding is really quite simple because I don't get it. And you're a very busy guy. You're the House leader. You are a new father. Simone just had your third child. How do you manage all of that stuff? And you do. You've been fighting like crazy and making it happen at the legislature as the minority leader in the House. How do you find that?
That's your 30 seconds.
So how many seconds do I get to respond?
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. Yeah, one of the most important things I think in life is making sure that you really take the time to dive deep into the things that you care about. I don't like this phrase that the light is at the end of the tunnel. I think the light is where you're at. Because if you're always chasing something, it will always be out of reach. So for me, I care so much about my community. I know that there's work that can happen outside of the chamber, and I know that there's that work that needs to be done. So for me, whether it's working 15 to 16 hours a day, it's work that has to happen. I also know I have 3 girls who are fired up as soon as I open the door, and they're running in and saying, "Hey, Daddy, can you be horsey today?" Right? And I'm like literally playing horse on the ground with the girls. I know that's important to them because those moments don't come back. And I know down at the state legislature, we are literally fighting for our rights, our freedoms, and those things matter most. And if we take those for granted, those could be stripped away at any moment. So it's not. For me, I would say it's not, the luxury is making sure that I feel like I'm on the right side of history. And I also have amazing partners, an amazing partner, and a coalition of folks who are ready to get them. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the things that is important is that, you spent, 4 years in the county recorder's office, and you had the ability to really walk through the elections process on several different occasions. And as you think about the role of Secretary of State, how would the work that you've done inform that work as Secretary of State?
Well, thanks. I think it's absolutely invaluable. It is an amalgam of my time in the Marine Corps, my time practicing law, my time as a dad. I know you could say, not as much as I can, because my 3 daughters are a little older than yours. They're 17, 14, and 12. All of those lessons on top of the awesome position of being in charge of what became the 2nd largest voting jurisdiction in the United States of America, the death threats that we received, the violence that happened at the Maricopa County Elections Department, all of those things, working with national figures, going to all those conferences nationally, talking to, heck, I went to post office conferences where we talked about barcodes on envelopes all day long. They sucked, but it was really informative. The whole set of experiences, I think, really puts me in a position to be able to step into the office and to be ready on day one. To be able to look to folks in Cochise County and Mojave County and know what the differences and the similarities are. To be able to understand some of the history of some of their election systems and what's available and what's not available. Through having worked directly with all of the counties already on election-specific items. And yeah, it's a different experience than being in the legislature for sure. But at the end of the day, actually running elections, being CIRA certified through the Election Center in Auburn University, all of that experience puts me in a position actually to be the most qualified person ever to run for this office in the history of the state. We've never had a CIRA certified candidate. We've never had a county recorder candidate who's actually done that work. So those 4 years were invaluable, not the least of which was I ended up having to, I had my own chief of staff. I know you guys share one in the house, so that's got to be less. But having your own chief of staff is a lot of fun. So, but anyway, yeah, it was important, and I think that the awesome responsibility of having gone through that and being able to lean on that experience and knowing all of those folks in the entire election family across Arizona and having worked directly with them is it's kind of a big deal. It's humbling.
Thank you. Reginald Boulding, if you win this primary, how do you plan to win the election against the GOP's nominee? And you can run all that down in just 90 seconds for us.
Your whole election plan.
Well, the most important thing that we have to do in order to win this election is we have to make sure that we maintain or we have to grow the electorate. That's the reality. And the way that you do that is you have to do that through coalition. There's no shortcut to coalition. And so that means that, what we're going to be doing and what we have already started to do is lay the groundwork throughout the state of Arizona to make sure that not only we're successful in this primary, but that work actually translates into the general election. I don't just talk about us having the support of the mayor, Flagstaff, Tucson, and Tempe just for something to say. It's because when you look at different parts of our state, you have to make sure that you have champions who are fighting for issues that matter to you. When I say not only making sure that we have the largest Latino civic engagement organization, this organization has done so much work over the last several years, the last 10 years. I know I can't speak to every Latino voter in the state of Arizona, but I know working with them, they can bring those voters directly to the polls. When it comes to our labor community and labor unions, UFCW, Local 99, one of the largest labor unions here in the state of Arizona, who've consistently worked to make sure that working class issues are at the forefront of all work. I know that they're going to do an awesome job making sure that we bring our labor community together. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to work in coalition. We're going to continue to build. And that's what we believe is going to be successful for us in the general and also in the primary.
Second question.
Well, mostly the same answer, but I think as a candidate, I have a lot more control over the way that I actually run. And I'm not going to run like Democrats usually run in Arizona. I mean, let's face it. We haven't been super successful in getting our base excited. We've had a significant demographic shift. We've had an incredible increase between 2018 and 2020 in our voter registration. We've done a lot of wonderful things, but our electorate is depressed for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the midterm effect. And so what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do what a lot of Democrats are sometimes a little bit leery of doing. I'm going to attack the Republicans for the hypocrisy on activist judiciary that would strip women of their rights to have an abortion. I'm going to attack the Republicans on their BS line being better for the economy when it was Biden administration and the Democratic Congress that gave us the infrastructure bill to widen the I-10 between Tucson and Phoenix, not Doug Ducey. I'm going to attack the Republicans on their never wanting to solve any immigration problems when they had the White House, they had the Senate, and they didn't do anything to solve any of the immigration issues. They just use it as a cudgel to divide the American public against one another. And the problem that we have, I think, as candidates for Democratic primaries and into the general election is that we're not seen as fighters. We're not seen as the people who are willing to stand up and call out the BS on the far right and the extremists for the hypocrites that they are. And we're not willing to attack them and attack their nonsensical policies. Because we want to seem polite, we want to seem nice, we want to be warm and fuzzy and all that good stuff. We cannot govern if we do not win. We cannot expand an electorate and protect voting rights if we do not win. This is still Arizona, folks. This may be a Democratic primary, but our eye has to be on the prize in November. Who do you want advocating for Mark Kelly at the top of the ticket? Who do you want advocating for our governor? Who do you want advocating for our legislative candidates across the entire state? You want someone who's going to call them out for their bullshit. That's what you want. Because that's what Arizona wants. And right now, Democrats, that's what we need in November. And I'd like to think that I'll deliver.
So, Arizona, as was mentioned, does not have a lieutenant governor position. Since 1949, 4 of the 10 people who've served as Arizona Secretary of State have ended up as the governor, usually because of a resignation, sometimes because of an impeachment.
Wasn't there an indictment in there too at one point?
Well, that was still a resignation.
Okay, fair enough.
The office you're running for is often seen as a stepping stone for ambitious politicians. Do you see yourself pursuing higher office? And what are your qualifications to be the governor of Arizona if you were to be a Secretary of State who is elevated to that office because the governor's chair ends up vacant? Reginald Bolden, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to this question, well, with all due respect to to Mr. Fontes, I don't even think experience-wise there's we're on the same playing field with regards to who would be ready on day one to serve as governor in the event that happened. Over the last 8 years, working in the state legislature, working in the House, working in the Senate, actively fighting against legislation and actively advancing legislation is extremely important. There is not one issue that I can't dive deep in and discuss here in any issue that we can talk about. I can get directly to any single policy, whether we're talking about water issues, whether we're talking about housing issues, whether we are talking about healthcare issues. That is just the experience that I bring. My background is in education. Education takes up over 50% of the state budget. Recognizing what things are at play with regards to education, how do we improve a system that should be showing up for our kids is extremely important. So for me, with regards to being prepared in the event that we need to have the Secretary of State fill in or serve as governor, that's one of those issues that I absolutely know that I would be capable of doing. But the reality is I'm running for Secretary of State. I'm running for this office. And it's important that you have someone that's focused on protecting voting rights. That's focused on making sure that we have voter education at an expansive level here in the state of Arizona. That's literally bringing people to the table so they're no longer on the menu. That's the office that we're running for. And that's going to be extremely important. That one, from a security standpoint, that you know that you have someone who can actually deliver if the time is needed, but also know that you have someone who has a vision to move forward this office and transform it to a way that people can be proud of.
Well, I think that I have to agree that we're definitely not on the same plane when it comes to experience. I've never served in a legislature. But Mr. Bolden has never been an elected executive officer who has had to hire and fire staff at a large scale, who has had to work day in and day out, not just imagining budgets, creating budgets, proposing budgets, presenting budgets, but administering budgets every single day. Those of you in business, those of you who have run things, you know. It's a whole different thing to throw a bunch of numbers out there and let somebody else do it versus actually doing the work. You know, I went to law school and I passed a couple of bar exams and I practiced law for a long time. I worked at the Attorney General's office in the Fraud and Public Corruption section. I know how to read a statute and I know how government systems work. I know how information technology systems work because we had to revamp our IT security systems in Maricopa County. I know how identification systems work because guess what? We had to do that in Maricopa County. I had to run an enormous warehouse because we were dealing with millions and millions and millions of pieces of mail and the logistics that go with that, moving people from here to there, making sure that those truck routes were at the right time of day from point A to point B so we could have maximum fuel efficiency. The day-to-day operation of government is something that I have done. Actually running a department is something that I've done. Actually being the elected official who has to make the executive decision, who cannot stand behind a caucus, who is not going to have co-sponsors for policies, who is singularly responsible for the act of that office, that is absolutely something that I have done. I can't say the same for my opponent. Being the governor means that you have to have executive level experience. Having revamped entire departments, working with an opposition legislature, i.e. the Board of Supervisors, and trying to negotiate with them to do the things needed to improve those systems. I've done that from an executive office. God forbid that something happened to whoever the governor ends up being when I'm Secretary of State. We wouldn't wish anything bad on anyone. But if that ends up happening, only one of the people on this stage actually has experience in elected executive office. We have separation of power for a reason. And those very different functions don't always come together. But if anything, my time in the United States Marine Corps, being selected for a meritorious commission to the officer ranks as a corporal, my law degree, all of my time in practice, whether it was in private practice or public practice, and my time as the Maricopa County Recorder running 4 different budgets, one of which ran on a 2-year cycle, not a 1-year cycle. Keep all of that in your head at the same time. One of us is ready on day one, not just to be the most qualified Secretary of State, but actually qualified to be the Lieutenant Governor.
I thoroughly enjoy posing the questions that lead to such a lively discussion. Our time with these candidates is nearing an end this afternoon. Now, each of them will give a brief closing statement. Adrian Fontes, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. And folks, thank you for enduring listening to a couple of politicians talk all afternoon. It's very kind of you. It's a generous gesture, and we appreciate it. And I think one of the critical takeaways from this is, look, when it comes to general questions of policy, Mr. Boulding and I are very much aligned. Right? He believes in voting rights and knocking out all the voter suppression stuff, and so do I. He believes in opening access for more voters, and so do I. But the 2 factors that are singularly important in this race are experience and electability. I just talked about why my experience, my background, qualifies me more. But the question of electability has got to be important for us Democrats. We are facing a crisis, a potential constitutional crisis in 2024 that we've never faced before in this country. We're recognizing now how fragile this democracy is. The prophetic words of Benjamin Franklin are coming true. When that person asked him, "What have you given us?" and he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." We're there. This very primary, as awesome as that responsibility is for the 2 of us, this very primary may decide what happens to the future of this republic. And you have to make that decision. But let me ask you to do one other thing, Democrats. Get off of the fence. You tell your friends and your neighbors and everybody else, pick a horse in this race and get into the fight. Because between the primary election and the general election, we've only got 7 weeks to get our Democratic candidate all the name recognition that he's going to need, and I say he because we're both he's. We need to support our candidates now. We need to get behind Chris Mays and get behind Mark Kelly and get behind, pick one of the gubernatorial candidates. There's only two now. Pick one of us. Get behind us now. Get into the fight. I will tell you right now, my campaign chair, Marlene Woods, is the widow of former Attorney General Grant Woods. Marlene wrote an editorial in the Arizona Republican, and she said flat out she'd been in Republican politics for a while before they became Democrats. I'm glad they did. And what's the one thing that the Republicans do that we don't do? They pick a horse in the primaries, and they get into it, and they support that horse, and they push hard for that candidate so they can have the infrastructure, the people. They can have what they need as candidates. Democrats, it's not okay to be on the fence right now. You're not going to make either one of us angry. We both have thick skin. If we haven't shown that to you today, you're never going to see it. Pick a horse. Get in the game, folks. Please. We need you. Our democracy needs you. Whoever is going to come out of this, and I hope it's me, whoever comes out of this is going to have had your support starting yesterday. You've heard all the qualifications, all that other stuff about why each of us thinks that we're the best candidate, the most experienced, the most electable, blah, 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 blah. It's about you. It's not about us. It's about you getting off the fence and getting into this fight with us, folks, and bring your friends and family along. Because if we're going to keep this office, if we're going to hold on to the 7th floor, it's going to come down to what happens right here in Pima County and in all the rest of the rural counties in Arizona. We're going to win Maricopa County. I can tell you that. We're very well poised to win Maricopa. We need you to get in the fight now. I know I'm a little over, but thank you. I'm kind of rooting for both of us a little there. So you're on a roll.
I'll give you a little bit more time too, Reginald.
I appreciate it. First I want to just say thank you all for coming out. Look, this is Memorial Day weekend. You could have been anywhere, but you chose to be here and listen to, again, two politicians talk about the Secretary of State's office. The reality is this race absolutely is about four things: vision, leadership, experience, and electability. Vision. I gave my vision tonight. I let you know as the Secretary of State what things we would do to actually transform the system. What things that we would do to bring more voters to the rolls. How we would incorporate our schools. How would we ensure that voters actually have the voter education that they need? How would we tackle corruption? How would we stand up in the event that we actually had a Republican governor that's choosing to attack our freedom to vote? Leadership. Politicians can tell you anything. They can say anything. But look at their track record. What have they done? Over the last 8 years, whether it's fighting in federal court to stand up for Arizonans' right to vote, as was mentioned in 2020, successfully sued the state of Arizona, so 35,000 Arizonans can vote during that election. And they all registered to vote in 10 days. Leadership, leading at the state legislature. The top-ranking Democrat of the largest Democratic caucus since 1966. Leading one of the largest voting rights organizations in this state. Experience. There's no one that has more experience in elected government or outside of elected government fighting on behalf of voters. When you hear our backgrounds, when you hear our experience, there's only one candidate that can tell you what they've done in elected office and what they've done outside of elected office. Because people will tell you whatever they think you want to hear. But looking at that track record of success actually allows you to see what they'll do in the future. With regard to electability, you don't win Arizona without building a broad coalition. It's just not possible. Raise your hand in here if you've ever applied for a job, ever in life. Right? When you apply for a job, you typically put down references. Because they believe you're they believe that you are capable of the job. Our references are over 50 state lawmakers and city council people who are backing us. The mayors of big towns, tribal nation leaders, union leaders, national organizations who are fighting on behalf of Stacey Abrams and Beto O'Rourke. They're all choosing us. And the question is why? Because they've seen the work that we've done. They know the work we'll do. And they know we have the ability to win the state of Arizona. Winning 8 elections, no matter if the district is a Democratic district or a Republican district, it matters. Those skill sets are valuable. We have to have a candidate who's going to have the ability to build a coalition, who is going to have the ability to show their leadership, and who's going to have the ability to stand on a track record of success. I ask for your vote for Reginald voting for Secretary of State. Thank you all so much.
I would like to thank the organizers, Democrats in Action, the Quail Creek Democratic Club, LD 19 and 21 Democrats, the Green Valley Democrats, and of course a big thank you to the great staff here at Quail Creek. I need to say a special thanks to our TucsonSentinel.com team who all pitched in to make this happen today, including a couple of our board members here who are working away, J.D. Wallace and Joe Ferguson. We owe these candidates thanks for sharing their ideas with us. Reginald and Adrian, thanks so much. And for all of you folks taking the time on a beautiful Saturday afternoon to be part of this, please give the candidates and yourselves a round of applause. Thank you very much.